I'm Glenn Setchfield, the Director of Marketing for DMI. We're a national IMO based in Boston. Welcome to our ongoing DMI University webinar series, where we explore agent topics related to sales, marketing, and operations that can make a real difference in your business. And today we're going to begin to help you a little bit with your legacy planning needs. And, as you know, as clients age, your role shifts from investment guidance to retirement income planning to end of life planning. So incorporating legacy planning into your practice can create really big wins for you and your clients. Today, just be aware we're muting and blocking the participant video during the presentation, but we're going to open it up at the end for 30 to 40 minutes, at the end after the 30 to 40 minute presentation for Q&A. But today we are just very lucky to be joined by Roberta Eckert of Nationwide's Retirement Institute and Phil Ferrara, a VP of Annuity Sales for DMI. But I'm going to just get on with the proceedings, and I'm going to hand it off to Phil for a few words.
Thanks, Glenn. Before I introduce Roberta, maybe some of you are not familiar with DMI. We are an independent marketing organization. We've been around for over 30 years. The great thing is I've been fortunate enough to be with DMI as a VP of annuity and an annuity specialist for 15 years now. And we're licensed in all 50 states. We work nationally as well as with a lot of people locally. And we specialize both in annuities as well as life insurance. So if you have any questions about what we do here and how we do it, a great way to learn more about us is just get on www.dmi.com, and it'll be right there for you to experience what our programs are all about. With that, I would like to introduce Roberta. Let me tell you a little bit about Roberta Eckert. She is Vice President of the Nationwide Retirement Institute. And Roberta joined Nationwide back in June of 2013 with more than 25 years of financial industry experience. As a vice president of the Retirement Institute, Roberta is dedicated to educating financial professionals, their clients, plan sponsors, and participants about retirement income planning strategies and their effective implementation. We are very fortunate to have a great relationship, not only with Roberta, but also with Nationwide in general, a great mutual life insurance company that really has some cutting edge products. So Roberta, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon. My name is Roberta Eckert, and I'm so glad that you could join us for our Legacy Essentials presentation on elevating your empathy, and then swinging over into discussing about helping clients prepare to age with dignity. And you'll see very shortly that these two are so inextricably linked that we can provide such value to our clients. But it is important, I think, to understand how these two kind of components intertwine. Now, I don't think it's any big surprise to anyone here on the call that there is an enormous intergenerational wealth transfer on the horizon. And as you start to consider baby boomers passing on their assets to their adult children, those heirs are going to decide whether or not to stick with their parents' financial professional. In fact, in a recent Cerulli poll, only 19% of affluent investors said that they are going to choose to work with the same financial professional that their parents used. But this is even more compelling. Among the 87% who report not using their parents' financial professional, 88% of them indicated they hadn't even considered doing so. So our work today centers around providing a deeper and more compelling relationship with your clients, but also protecting, if you will, those assets under management. And if you have older clients whose assets you'd like to keep under management, it is really important to have those end-of-life conversations with those clients, as well as establishing relationship with those heirs. But those can be some of the trickiest and the most difficult conversations to have. And that's why the Nationwide Retirement Institute put together this particular program. So what we're going to be doing is looking at providing you with some awareness and skills that you need to really successfully discuss legacy planning with your clients. And really, it all begins with empathy. Now, I'm sure that if I asked anybody here on the call if they felt that they were empathetic, everybody would say, well, certainly I'm empathetic. It's part of what I do. It's part of my business. But you'll see very shortly that there's a science in empathy, as well as the actual inherent ability to be empathetic. And that's, again, what we're going to be exploring in a little bit more depth. Now, as we get started, I do want to point out that the group that I work with, the Nationwide Retirement Institute, is here really to provide education. We provide it to you, we provide it to your clients, lots of different audiences. But what we're not going to do is be giving anybody any legal advice, any tax advice, any any legal advice, tax advice, investment advice. We are here to educate you. What we are going to do is just mention something briefly about the Retirement Institute. We provide about 8 or 9 different presentations, all centered around insights that we've been given access to through our polls, our outreach, our focus groups, and understanding much more clearly what it is that your clients are looking for from their financial professional and what they wish they knew more about. And given that kind of information drives us to create the content that we do. Very frequently, we have a tool that you can access and utilize with your clients to take the next step. And we also have in our home office in Columbus, Ohio, several individuals who are there to provide consultative support for you, answer questions you have, whether it's about the content, the tool, general questions about our various topics like Social Security or healthcare. And we consider that an end-to-end program that really differentiates us from our competitors. What we're going to talk about today are these 3 things: why empathy matters, moving into some of the science I mentioned a moment or two ago, and then a couple of takeaways or practice tips that can help you really fine-tune this particular skill. So in 2019, our group, which is the Nationwide Retirement Institute, launched a research initiative, and what we wanted to do was study client trust. Specifically, we were very interested in knowing more about the type of trust that leads clients to want to continue to work with their financial advisor. We wanted to get insights into the likelihood of future interactions, and those also apply to whether a beneficiary or an heir might choose to stick with their parent's financial professional after the parents pass away. And what we found was that there are really 2 types of trust that influence future interactions. One is cognitive, and the other is affective. Cognitive trust is something you could think of more like head trust. It's based on factors like past performance, perceived expertise. Those are factors that usually can be quantified. They can be ranked. So, for example, it's really a matter of public record whether a financial professional has advanced designations or if they're beating performance benchmarks, those kinds of things, again, that can be quantified. Effective trust, on the other hand, is totally different story. We call that heart trust. It really refers to how someone feels in their interaction with the other party. This is a lot squishier. It's a lot more touchy-feely. It's much harder to quantify, but effective trust is rooted in a sense of the good intentions and the integrity of the other person. Now, our research also showed that this effective trust, as opposed to cognitive trust, that's the quantitative element, significantly drove the anticipation of future reactions across all the demographic groups that we surveyed. And the factor that most powerfully drove this effective trust was empathy. So I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of the study, but suffice it to say that the larger number you see here, the more significant that component of trust is in affecting future interactions. Now, this does not mean that the factors with low numbers aren't relevant, but you can think of them as table stakes. Your clients assume that you're knowledgeable, that you work for a good firm, and that the products you recommended you've done some research and due diligence and they've performed well. But what's most likely to lead them to do business with you in the future is their perception that you see and understand who they are and how they see the world. And that's why empathy matters. So when we're talking about empathy, we're really talking about feelings. But as I mentioned twice already, this can get a little more scientific as well. And I'm going to start by making a pretty important designation between empathy as a trait and empathy is a skill. And the skill is the one that we, just like any other skill, can practice and work on it to make it even more stronger. But empathy is a trait. What that does is refer to our kind of innate human ability to connect with other people through empathy. And if you look at any kind of research in the field of evolutionary biology and neuroscience, it's shown that people are really wired for empathy. We're naturally empathetic. You're walking down the street with a friend and the friend stumbles and falls. You have an innate empathetic response. Are you okay? You help them up. You want to make sure they're not hurt. But the other research has shown that effectively demonstrating empathy to other people is a skill. It's not enough to perceive that you are empathetic. If you're demonstrating it to someone, then you are going to go a lot further in any kind of human context that you have. If something's a skill, then to me, that's something we can improve by learning and by practice. You didn't learn how to ride a bike just by watching a video. You had to actually practice doing it and learn how all of the moving parts work in concert. And so this is the act of performing empathy I mentioned earlier, and it's really key to deepening trust with your clients. Now, the good news is that our trait empathy gives us a lot of ground to work with, and we're going to be building on those skills a little bit more in the time that I've got with you today. So like trust, empathy has both affective components and cognitive components. Affective empathy describes the psychological aspects of feeling what the other person is feeling. Well, cognitive empathy involves really mentally processing another's feelings and thoughts. So it's, again, more feeling versus feeling what they're feeling versus mentally understanding what they're thinking and feeling. And there are 5 components here, and taken together, they form the affective and the cognitive components of empathy. And those are skills that everybody can really continuously improve. Some might be a little more challenging than to develop than others, but I think understanding the components is a great starting point to a greater ability to perform empathy. And we're going to go through them one by one. And the first is effective response. So if you remember a moment ago how I mentioned empathy as a trait and we're naturally wired for empathy, that's an indication of our effective response. It's an intuitive, empathetic response in which we mimic the person we're observing. And I think one of the best examples and one of the coolest examples is when we smile at a baby and they smile back, or they smile at us and we smile back. We see a loved one who's in pain, whether physical or mental, and they're crying and we kind of tear up. we watch when an athlete takes a particularly rough hit, we kind of cringe and recoil. The point is that this is a natural tendency, and it's also a crucially important component of empathy. There have even been studies demonstrating that people who engage in more of this unconscious mimicry score higher on various aspects of empathy. Second is effective mentalizing. And effective mentalizing is the ability to imagine the mental state of another person based on the emotional cues that we're able to read in their persona. For example, let's imagine you're at a fancy cocktail party and the people arrive at this party by walking down a grand staircase, and you see a woman in a long, sparkly dress slip on the last step, fall, and do a face plant. And once she gathers herself, you see her face flush. You watch her wince as she stands up. Based on the way that you can see her react, you can imagine she feels pretty embarrassed, and she may have hurt herself in some way. So effective mentalizing is that bridge from effective empathy to cognitive empathy. Now we're using our minds to make informed conjectures and determinations based on visual and auditory emotional cues. We're able to make them because we noticed her reactions. We're able to process them and extrapolate from them. And being a good noticer is really essential to develop our empathy skills. The next is self and other awareness. And this you can consider as full recognition and appreciation that the person we are observing is not us. That might not sound like a big breakthrough, but when you realize that they're not us, then you are much more able to put yourself in their shoes and really understand where they're coming from. So it might seem like a really obvious point, but it's often a place where we get tripped up. We come to every experience with the weight of our own past experience and current mental framework. We're never neutral observers. So careful acknowledgement of the self and other distinction enables us to separate ourselves and avoid looking through the lens of our own experience. And I think about very often you hear people say something about someone else's decisions, and they say something like, well, if I were them, I would have done something, which is generally a different course of action. Well, that's not exactly true, because if you were that other person, you would be doing exactly what that other person did, because you would actually be that other person and you would make those decisions because you would have that other person's framework and background. So really, it's almost foolish to say, if I were that person, I would do thus and so, because you're not that other person. And if you were that other person, you would be doing exactly what they did. So we're going to move on to perspective taking. This is where we get to the real business of empathy, because perspective taking involves the mental flexibility to take the view of the other person. So we're inhabiting the world of the other person, but, and this is really the important part, we inhabit the world of the person as that person. We're trying to do our best to see that person from their own point of view, from their world perspective, from their background, from their framework in their world. A world that's populated with people, places, things that are really important to them and that they inhabit as a fully developed person with a distinct set of experiences and formulated beliefs. So the skill is imagining, as I mentioned a little earlier, I am you in your situation, which is oriented towards the other person, as opposed to I am me in your situation, which is self-oriented. Being other-oriented in your perspective taking means putting yourself entirely in the position of another, letting go of how you might react, and instead imagining how that person. So there are many ways of saying this. I'm sure you've heard seeing the world through their eyes or walking a mile in their shoes. But bear in mind that perspective taking without self or other awareness can really lead you astray. If we don't maintain a self/other awareness, we might be good at taking another's perspective, but we process what it means to ourselves, not the other person. And that differentiation is really important. Finally, we're going to look at emotional regulation. And that emotional regulation is being able to maintain control of your own emotions. And that can be tricky sometimes as well. People might provide you with information that's extremely painful for you to hear. Your face might reflect that, or they might say something that you think is funny, but it's not really very funny to them. So this emotional regulation, not keeping a poker face per se, but at least understanding that your emotions do play out in a very physical way, whether it's your body language or your facial expressions, and that one great component of empathy is being able to regulate that so that, again, you are not putting and casting your own worldview or your own experiences on top of what they are telling you. And this is really a good segue to talking about empathy in practice. So we're going to look at that in a way that your client actually and consciously notices. And the goal of performing empathy is really to convince the client of this truth, of the following statements, that is. Number one, I see and understand who you are. I see and understand how you see the world. And I see and understand who you want to be. Now, remember, there's a big difference between you believing these statements are true about a client relationship and your client believing the truth in them. In other words, there might be a disparity between what you know and what your client believes you know. And we're going to talk about some skills in this section that are going to be skills that you can utilize to close that gap. First of all, acknowledge your particular place in worldview. Understand how your experiences and beliefs shape your own perspective, and be aware of biases. And we'll talk through those biases as well. Each one of us brings a different perspective to conversations. So we want to take a few moments to discuss the issues of perspective. And first, we're going to look at acknowledging your particular place and worldview. And I love this example, especially because as I am taping this, it's during the NFL football playoffs. So let's say you're at a football game, you got great seats right at the 50-yard line. During a play, you can see that the player on the other team is offside. The referee, however, doesn't make that call. You turn to your companion and complain. They agree, and you both commiserate about how poor officiating is probably going to cost your team the game. You know what you saw? You're confident in what you saw. You validated what you saw because your companion sat right next to you and said the same thing. But the referee, on the other hand, saw something totally different or didn't see it at all. What's the gap? What happened? The trouble is that we see things from our own particular place, our own particular seat, so to say. And we tend to think that what we see is all there is to see. And we forget and overlook that our vision is limited by our particular physical location. So I'm going to continue that stadium analogy. We've got a tendency to view ourselves as the blimp that floats over the scene and has a really comprehensive and 360 complete view. But the first step, therefore, is to acknowledge the partiality of our point of view. And this partiality isn't anybody's fault. It's simply a function of the fact that each one of us is a unique person and we all have a unique set of experiences. We have to be open to the fact that other people might see the world quite differently, and they might interpret their own experiences in ways that you might not. Psychologists actually have a term for this. It's called the illusion of objectivity. And that's the tendency of people to see themselves as more impartial, more insightful, and less biased than other people. So that's one step. The second step, understand your own space. This is the best defense against reading yourself into the client's situation. And it's to be very clear with yourself about how your own personal characteristics, expertise, and experience influence how you think. If you have a client that was brought up in very meager circumstances, they had to pay for all of their college education, for example, they didn't, their family lived paycheck to paycheck, and then you yourself might have had a much more affluent upbringing. Well, it's difficult sometimes to read your own personal characteristics, experience, and expertise into their situation. So you don't want to put yourself in or read yourself into their situation, because how they approach money, how they approach education, how they approached their job, totally different perhaps than you. So there's an individual in the field of financial therapy. His name is Brad Klontz, and he has a great concept called money script. That's SCRIPTS, like prescriptions. And according to Brad Klontz, the money script demonstrates your belief system about money and can illuminate both good and bad financial habits you've developed over the years. In my family, it's well known that I am a tightwad, but not necessarily because I gained that from my family. It's when I graduated from college, that was it. My parents paid for college. I didn't have any student debt, but once I graduated from college, I was totally on my own financially. Now, Klontz has laid out a plan to use while working with clients, but here's a simple exercise you might want to think about. Write down 3 things that you believe are true about money, why you think they're true, and when you came to believe them. And if you do that, then you're starting the work of really thinking pretty deeply or more deeply about your own attitudes and your own perspectives. And then finally, be aware of biases that are going to cause you to stumble. And we'll walk through those. And so we're going to walk through those in for just a couple of moments. One of them is correspondence bias, and that's the tendency for people to attribute someone else's behavior to that person's personality traits rather than to the situation or context. So, for example, if you see someone behaving a certain way, being rude to a server at a restaurant, maybe, they assume the person's always rude than considering any extenuating circumstances. For example, what else could be stressing them out? Maybe they have a terrible illness or got some bad news financially, or whatever it is might cause that, rather than the fact that they are just inherently rude. We tend to be a little more forgiving of ourselves, and we often see our own behavior as being determined by the situation and our own traits as being more reasonable. A second bias is confirmation bias, and this is the tendency to look for information that confirms what we already believe to be true. And one great exercise is if I were to ask you, what TV channel, what news channel would you turn to in the morning, dependent upon whether you were left-wing leaning or right-wing leaning? And I think you would be able to identify which that is. And people who lean one way or another might tune into those channels because those channels confirm and feed into what they believe is already true. The third is overconfidence bias, and that is a general overestimation of our own skills and abilities. So we need to maybe take a dose of humility from time to time. We all have innate empathy, so it's possible we think we're more empathetic than we actually are, and that's why it is so important to be self-aware. So hopefully by now you're getting ready to dial up your empathy. We're going to look at some tips, and then we're going to move on to talking a little bit about aging. So first of all, be honest about what you really know about your clients, and start with just one. And think about the statements that I mentioned a little earlier. Number 1, I see and understand who you are. I see and understand how you see the world. I see and understand who you want to be. And if you can say yes to all 3, and you feel pretty confident that you're correct, then the next step is share those answers with your client and see if you are maybe not guilty of overconfidence bias. You really have to understand the client before you can effectively communicate that you do. In fact, we've created an online quiz that you can take, and you can take this to assess your current level of client understanding and maybe identify some opportunities that you have to go deeper. Next is filling in the gaps in your knowledge as necessary. So we've got a conversation starter you can download at nationwidefinancial.com. And it gives some questions and requests that can really maybe start that conversation that goes a little deeper, maybe eliciting thoughtful and honest answers from clients, sort of like, describe a day in the life of your ideal retirement. Describe how you want your wealth to live on after you pass away. Some of these open-ended questions that really allow your client to reflect and give some deeper thought to provide you with that knowledge that's so important. Next is framing correctly. And here's a story I think that illustrates this. I had a colleague once who was a really good and really very effective leader, very senior leader. And his identity was really deeply tied to his commitment to mentoring. But when they did an organizational survey, his employees scored him low on the response to the statement, "My leader cares about my development." He was really surprised and kind of disappointed. So he talked to his own coach who said, don't do anything differently, except when you have a conversation with a direct report, open and close by using the word mentoring. Say something like, "I'm glad we could have a mentoring conversation today." So he followed the advice and framed things correctly. And lo and behold, the ratings the next year were off the charts. So it's important to take care when you frame your conversations and be mindful to include what you know about the client's values. Make sure that they are aware that you understand what those values are. Next is becoming a first-rate noticer. You want to put your Sherlock Holmes hat on. And earlier we discussed the importance of noticing. This whole empathy process doesn't really get off the ground if we fail to notice clients' emotional cues. It's a really underestimated skill. And while financial professionals are usually pretty good at observing emotional cues, you don't want to be too confident. So here's an idea. Next time you're in a meeting with a client, ask a peer to sit in and watch for emotional cues. Compare notes afterward and see where you agreed and maybe where you differed. The goal isn't to determine who was right. The goal is to broaden your mind to see what you missed in any given situation. Try it with several peers and see whether there's a pattern in what you've been noticing and what you've missed. And then finally, make good use of what we call empathetic communication tactics. Empathetic understanding is conveying understanding of the client experience. Affirmation, validating their experience and perspective. Evocations, bringing their experience alive in rich and descriptive language, and then verbalizing the concerns you believe the client has in order to ensure you're correct. Sort of like active listening. It's repeating it back to make sure that you're correct before you can move on to the next segment in your conversation. So we've talked a lot about some lofty notions about why empathy matters, science of empathy, demonstrably communicating it to your clients. But I think one great takeaway is that empathy is a key driver of future interactions. So we want to recap how you can benefit from performing empathy and really conveying it in a way that makes a client consciously aware of it can really lead to deeper client trust. That's so essential for the financial professional who would like to become the trusted partner. Trusted partner moves beyond a transactional role and really becomes part of the client's inner circle, hopefully including the client's heirs. And with that level of access, it's really possible to have more delicate discussions that legacy planning requires. And one of those has to do with aging. So bear with me for just a moment, and I'm going to switch over to our discussion about aging. It is really difficult to build a successful business as a financial professional. You don't need me to tell you that. But one area in which a lot of financial professionals really struggle is articulating a value proposition. You know, asset management's being commoditized. And if you want to compete against the wave of low-cost robo-advice, the answer is pretty obvious. You're not a robot, and only humans can connect with clients in a way that no software program can. And so one of those things is helping clients prepare to age with dignity. Now, one thing that I mentioned when we were having our legacy discussion is that this is here to provide you with education only. So we are not providing you with legal or tax advice and so forth. But just as a recap about empathy and aging, and one of those things is, remember, I understand and see who you are. I see and understand how you see the world, and I see and understand how you want to be and who you want to be. Now, recently, there was a quote about legacy planning, and it has to do with basically the fact that every year you have to add more and more. It's not enough to just beat benchmarks and provide a great RMD discussion or withdrawal scenario. And I think helping clients plan for aging can be a really important component of your value proposition, because it really allows you to leverage your empathy and your emotional connection to your clients. So today, we're going to talk about these three things: why financial professionals are uniquely positioned to help with aging, how you can help your clients plan for some of these longevity risks, and how you can bring that bridge to the multi-generational opportunities. So why you can help with aging? Why would a financial professional engage with their clients on this topic? Well, who's got a better understanding of clients' goals and objectives than an empathetic financial professional? You're the one that helped them prepare for retirement. And of course, you always want to be the good news person, but if you have developed a really strong connection with your clients, this is a very important and very necessary part of that whole wealth management connection that you have and the service that you provide with your clients. So you need to talk about aging because asset management goals evolve as you get older. Your housing choices can affect your finances, and we certainly do not want to overlook the need for care as well as its affiliated cost. So legacy plan, sorry about that. So as we're looking at planning for longevity risks, planning or living a long life sounds really great as long as you can do the things you want to continue to do. But of course, there are risks that come with getting older. So cognitive, physical, financial risk that has to do with, again, centered around care, whether it's long-term care or whether it is just general health care. There's a financial risk, of course, of running out of money. But let's look at these one at a time, and we'll start with cognitive risk. And as our clients age, obviously, there's a significant chance that they are going to experience some cognitive decline. Now, mild cognitive decline is a normal part of aging, and a lot of people are going to continue to function really well despite the occasional lost car keys or forgotten password, but many are still going to experience some more serious cognitive problems. 1 to 3 seniors will pass away with some form of dementia, and the numbers are a little startling because more than 6 million Americans are currently living with Alzheimer's, and more than 11 million Americans are currently providing unpaid care to someone with Alzheimer's or with dementia. And so as a financial professional, it's also in your own best interest to help clients plan for the possibility that at some point they might not be able to manage their financial affairs. And so we want to move on to understanding incapacity, and understanding legal capacity. And understanding legal capacity is one of the biggest challenges in the aging prospect, because I think it's the prospect of someone losing the ability to manage their affairs. So officially, legal capacity is the ability to understand and appreciate the consequences of one's actions and to be able to make rational decisions. So even if somebody has dementia, but they're still able to understand the meaning and importance of a legal document, they probably then still have the legal capacity to approve it and to sign it. But guardianship, also referred to as a conservativeship, is a legal process utilized when someone can't make or communicate safe or sound decisions anymore about either their own person, about property, or they might become susceptible to fraud or undue influence. And I know myself, we are required to take a senior fraud course every year as part of our ongoing training, and understanding the challenges that as you age, a family member or a trusted person of inner circle could provide in the terms of fraud. So establishing a guardianship might remove some considerable rights from someone. So it should be considered only after alternatives to guardianship have been proven ineffective or are unavailable. So if you think more about incapacity without planning, then you really are setting your client up for some kind of failure, if you will. And so let me see if I can't put this in better perspective. Let's say I develop severe Alzheimer's disease. I know I'm unable to process information, can't make a decision, communicate it to others. How would my family manage my affairs? Well, they would need to have a guardian appointed for me. That means hiring an attorney, drafting a petition for guardianship, filing it, scheduling a hearing, all of that. And the downside is, of course, under guardianship, I would lose the ability to manage my affairs. But what if my family couldn't agree on who should be making decisions? Well, then the court might appoint an independent guardian, but that person might not have an in-depth knowledge of my personal situation or my own desires and requests. You do. And I think that's why it's so important to understand incapacity without planning. In fact, there's a FINRA rule in place that talks a little bit more about, a little bit more about this. And that's going to help you broach this topic with clients. This FINRA rule requires that financial firms ask any client age 65 years old and older for the name and the contact information of a trusted contact person who can assist in the administration of those client accounts. And that's a really good way to start this conversation about guardianship, incapacity, and so forth. Another incentive for clients to choose a power of attorney is that it eliminates the need for that guardianship. So when someone executes a power of attorney before they're incapacitated, the principal and agent have concurrent authority to act for the principal. When you sign up a power of attorney, it doesn't mean the principal's the principal's ability to act and execute documents on their own behalf. The importance of the word durable is that the agent's durable power of attorney is going to remain effective even after the principal becomes incapacitated. So there are some planning situations and steps to take to plan for a possible incapacity while the client is still in a position to be able to communicate their wishes and their desires. Now, we're going to provide you with copies of these slides, so I'm not going to go through all of these different points, but a power of attorney does have the ability to do all of these things. And when a client puts a power of attorney for finances in place, they can customize it to meet their needs. And in general, a power of attorney will give an agent the following powers, but also important to know the powers that a power of attorney can't give. And a power of attorney for finances generally doesn't give an agent the power to do the things that you can see on the slide. So what this really means is an agent generally can't make changes that impact the client's wealth transfer strategy. I think that's super important. Who should be elected as an agent? Well, somebody trustworthy, someone maybe with a calm disposition. They might immediately think of a child, but if the child has had their own financial issues or they're emotionally maybe not the most mature in the family, there might be someone else that might be better suited for that particular job. So when we move on to managing healthcare, this is also something where proper planning is so essential. So it's important to have some key documents in place regarding healthcare. The last thing you want is a healthcare crisis that requires a family member to step in and consult with doctors and everybody at 3 a.m. because nobody falls down the stairs at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. Take my word for it. I've had this happen in my own family. That can be incredibly stressful for everyone involved. So the importance is that having key documents in place can reduce the burdens on the family. And they could include things like a durable healthcare proxy, an advanced healthcare directive, a DNR or do not resuscitate order. And really, as you're looking at final wishes, that's also something very important. As people begin to age and really get older and older, this is not things that are going to be brand new to them. It's not going to be something that's going to come out of left field, but they are very important questions to be asking and things that are being covered now in a living will. And this is how someone communicates their wishes for end-of-life care to their family, their doctors, and anybody else that needs to know. And it can't be hard to imagine why that's so important. Clearly stating how you want to be treated, and when you no longer want to receive that treatment, can provide family members with peace during a really difficult time. And I've heard lots of contentions in different families about, I didn't want to be the one to pull the plug. Well, you wouldn't be the one to pull the plug. The individual who is the one that needs perhaps that to happen is the one that's already made that decision, and you are just carrying out their wishes. So selecting an agent for healthcare, not totally different from the financial side of things. Someone who's willing to talk to them about their wishes and they trust will faithfully do what they ask, even if it's really sobering and stressful for them personally. Maybe really someone who lives in pretty close proximity can be kind of a negotiator and can handle conflicting opinions, especially when it comes to family members that might have differences about how the final and end of life stages should be handled. And also clearly someone that should be a strong advocate for your client. Physical risk is also something that's crucially important. Cognitive issues aren't the only concern. Other risks have to do with physical and have to do with emotional and financial, of course. So when you're looking at chronic conditions, the propensity for falling, something I mentioned a little while ago, these are something where the occurrence or the incidence probability rises, of course, the older someone gets. So really important to have those conversations as well. No longer are they talking about downsizing. People don't necessarily want to sell the house that they're comfortable in. They have friends in the community. They've got those social aspects. So maybe it's right sizing, maybe looking at ways in which you can put some that you can work on renovating the home to accommodate for your current or future aging. So is it aging in place? Is it a continuing care community, assisted living? All of those things are things that you want to be talking about. And in fact, after COVID-19, when the incidences of individuals that passed away in a nursing home was so extraordinarily high, our recent research points to more than 6 in 10 say they would rather pass away than go to a nursing home. And additionally, they think it's more important than ever to stay at home for long-term care needs. They do not want to go to a nursing home. They never did, but especially after COVID, they're even more susceptible to, or they're even more have that propensity to keeping that opinion as well. So planning to age in place, lots of different things you can be talking to them about. In fact, there are seminars, I believe, available now provided by assisted living communities and so forth that talks about these kinds of things, but it's going to incur some costs. We might need to make some renovations to the client's home. Hire a geriatric care manager to coordinate care. They might need homemaker services. They might need long-term care or things that maybe aren't covered by long-term care. All things that carry a financial layout, of course. So when you're looking at long-term care qualifiers, in other words, long-term care is really an event and not a place. And clients might have a legitimate need for help with these activities. But these long-term care qualifiers are ones that, if certified by a physician, do allow you to go on claim if you have provided your client with long-term care insurance in order to offset the costs of a long-term care event. So as we're starting to look a little bit more about, a little bit more at financial risk, this is probably the one that you are most qualified, I guess, in talking about. It might be a great place for you to start talking about risks as someone ages. Start with the financial risk, then maybe move on to the cognitive risk and the other ones that we discussed. So this really brings us back to that final risk of longevity, which is the financial risk. And even if an aging client never needs something like long-term care, they're certainly likely to incur plenty of other healthcare expenses. And you've been helping them with those expenses already. A lot of people think Medicare will pay for long-term care, but it doesn't. And without long-term care coverage, a client might have to tap into some accounts, maybe during a down market, incur taxes and so forth, like things of that nature, in order to pay for that care. So even if they don't have a more formal plan in place through long-term care insurance, it is important to discuss what the financial situation would be if they did have a need for care. So why do all this? What's in this for you, the financial professional? Well, we've seen the statistics. Most beneficiaries don't continue working with their parents' financial professional, and a majority don't even consider it. That means assets could leave your management almost every time a client passes away, but of course it doesn't have to be that way. So consider how a failure to plan could mean pain for the family in the form of guilt or stress, possibly even feuds. And that's also a risk for your practice, because family members who struggle due to a lack of planning aren't likely to look favorably on the role you played or didn't play in the process. And the situation is also likely to result in a lot of extra work for you as you put out fires and deal with unhappy family members. So by contrast, proper planning can engage family members, gives you the opportunity to work with them, let them see firsthand the value you bring. And as you work with your aging clients, ask for introductions to those family members whom the client talks about, arrange family meetings. Show them what you've done to make the client's lives and their lives easier, and how the work you've done has helped preserve assets and also create a legacy for them. So I hope you take away the following points about aging, and that is practicing empathy opens the doors to discussion about what really matters. Legacy planning helps both your client as well as their extended family. And then finally, it's going to help you retain and grow your business. Now, we've got a couple of resources Glenn is going to provide to you. We have an analyzer that can help determine what someone's Social Security claiming option should be. This is not generic, it's speculative, it is very specific. We have an assessment that can really dial in very closely to what long-term care and health care costs out of pocket would likely be, depending upon when they choose to retire. And then through our relationship with the National Council on Aging, we have a tool called My Medicare Matters. And what that does is allow clients, through a link that you send them, to go through a series of questions that will then generate a report that tells them exactly what their Medicare choices and affiliated costs would be, depending upon the community that they live in. So all of those tools allow you to bring this information to clients without having to take on a whole new burden of learning all this stuff. If you have a camera or I want to take a picture of this, our that created this is called the Insight Solutions Field Team. And we are happy to deliver information of this to you again. So Glenn, hopefully you'll have us back. I know we're going to be back next week, or in 2 weeks, and also to your clients. Or you could go on nationwidefinancial.com. But for the moment, I have left
I turn it back over to Glenn. My apologies again to sound quality earlier. What we've done is combine two presentations into one, but I wanted to hit a lot of these high points so that you can start thinking about things that can really help enhance what you already do so well in the quantitative financial arena. So Phil, Glenn, it is all yours.
Thanks very much, Roberta. And you know what? You're such a great presenter. Maybe there's a way we could have a cleaner recording of that presentation to put up on DMI University, because I do like to record these and have them available to our audiences. So maybe we can do that. We'll talk offline, Roberta. So look for that. Anybody on this call, we will send you a follow-up with that recording so you could access it, so you can share it as you like. And of course, as always, we try to take issues or topics like this for the financial advisor and distill them down to their simplest form. And that's what you can find on dmiuniversity.com. Please check that out.